What's up, everybody? JJ Buckets here, and it is time to talk basketball.
5-1-4 output. Little shake right there, dropping his man, and then nailing it.
Now, if you were looking for more draft profiles, if you were looking for that content, rest assured, I'm going to have an Evan Mobley video dropping later this week. But before I get into that, I had a chance to do a really fun collaborative video here with the Waraich Report. I apologize to you if you see this and I butchered the name. I guarantee you I tried my absolute hardest. But we had a chance here to explore the idea of the Raptors potentially trading their lottery pick for a star. I feel like that's been a discussion that has been around in Raptors Nation a little bit. It is a discussion that I think is warranted, whether or not you want to just go and add a star player and add it to this core that's potentially ready to compete now. We discussed some of the potential names that are going to be available, you know, how much they potentially elevate this team in the Eastern Conference, how competitive it realistically makes them, and at the very end, we discussed whether or not it's really worth it or whether or not the Raptors just should take the pick and draft in the lottery. I think it's a great video. I know it's going to be a bit of a long one, but if you stick around for most of it, I guarantee it's worth it. It was a great back and forth, so hopefully you enjoy it as well. If you do, obviously hit that subscribe button, not only for me, but go over to the Waraich Report, hit it for him as well. He makes great content. He has very just great approach to doing these kinds of videos. I really enjoyed working with him. So without further ado, let's hop into the video.
Hey guys, this is the Waraich Report. What's up, everyone?
I'm sure most of you will know him. Like, I feel like if you're following my channel, like you're also following his channel. I've seen a lot of like people commenting in both our videos. So hopefully you do, but if you don't, you're going to be introduced to another really great person in the Raptors YouTube. So I'm super excited to get this video going.
Let's do this. I'm pretty sure like you mentioned, I'm pretty sure we have a lot of mutual subscribers. So I'm sure they're going to love this collaboration here. So let's jump right into it.
Mm-hmm. So the topic of the day here today is to do with the Raptors and the draft, but it's going to be a little bit of a different approach here for the day. We're going to debate whether or not the Raptors should move their lottery pick this season in efforts to acquire a star player to add to this core. Now, I think the most important thing when you're looking at this question, because I have seen it brought up, like there's obviously been trade rumors for some disgruntled stars out there, like a Bradley Beal, which apparently Messiah's had his eye on, or like a Karl Towns that apparently wants out of Minnesota. I think it's important to look at what stars are going to be available and what the cost of those stars might be.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I don't know how you feel about this, JJ. Personally, if we do get a pick outside of maybe the top 5, top 6, I'm looking to trade, because you look at some of these guys, they're really nice players, but you have to ask yourself this one question. Are these guys going to come in and help us in the playoffs right away? I've been looking at a lot of mock drafts. A lot of these guys are 19, 20-year-olds, so they're fairly young players. They're going to take at least minimum 2 to 3 years to really come in at the NBA level, contribute right away, and really help us in the playoffs. And by that time, we're going to have guys like Pascal Oji, Fred VanVleet, whose contracts are going to be coming up soon. And even the players we do draft, their contract comes off in about 3-4 years. So we'd have to obviously pay them some money as well. So
I think you've brought up an excellent point. I think for me, if that pick is somewhere between the 1 to the 5 and maybe even like just that, maybe just outside of it to the 6 as well, it feels a lot harder to move on from, just because this draft is, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a fairly deep draft. I think you can make that case, but at the same time, it's also fairly top heavy in the sense that, you know, the first 5 guys in this draft are just frankly so much better than everybody that kind of comes after it. Like you look at guys like obviously Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, Jalen Suggs, Jonathan Kuminga, Jalen Green, and all those guys are honestly being looked at as franchise altering talents. So I think if I was in the top 5, I would want to hold on to that pick. But like outside of it, like you're right, the core is going to be aging out, and the contracts are obviously going to be expiring at the same time. So by the time, you know, one of these guys that we could take maybe between the 6 to the 10 develops, you know, your core just isn't at that point where you can compete for a championship anymore, or maybe isn't in the best position spot. So in that sense, I think there it might be a little worth exploring what a potential star could add to this add to this team now. So somebody that obviously I feel like has been around in Raptors trade rumors for ages now. Like I have lost track at this point how long we've heard it, but I think Bradley Beal is the obvious name that you're looking at here, right? When you're talking about moving that lottery pick for a star.
Absolutely. I mean, Bradley Beal, we know what he can do. He's averaged like something crazy last season. I can't remember, like 30, 32 points or whatever he was averaging. Insane amount of points. He can hit clutch shots, which we know the Raptors really struggle with in late game situations. So Bradley Beal, although we've been hearing his name for years, Washington keeps mentioning that they're not going to trade him. So we would obviously have to throw a lot of pieces in there for the Washington Wizards to accept that trade. Now, I want to hear your first take on what you would be willing to give up. Obviously, if this year's first round draft pick would have to be included in a Bradley Beal trade. Now, for me personally speaking, before I let you dig into this, it doesn't make sense to give up one of the three. Now, I know people are may suggest, well, we can trade Fred VanVleet and replace him with Malachi Flynn, but I still think Flynn has ways to go to become a starting point guard. But it's hard to acquire Bradley Beal without giving up those three guys, but you would have to give up a lot of draft picks. So what would you give up if you're Masai Ujiri or Bobby Webster in a trade for Bradley Beal?
I think this is obviously a situation where on top of giving up this year's lottery pick, you're going to be giving up multiple picks just because of, I don't want to say the name notoriety of like Bradley Beal, but because obviously he's a star and there's this perception around the league that he's not going to come cheap in any situation. I think obviously you're going to need some kind of cap filler there, but then at the same time, considering you're trading in the offseason where the Raptors should have some cap room, you're going to have a little more wiggle room in terms of salary matching. Oh my God, as much as I hate to say it because he just got here, Gary
Trent.
Gary Trent Jr. plays the exact same position as Bradley Beal, and there's a sour taste in my mouth in saying that, because I love what Trent has brought to this team early on, and I think he definitely has all-star potential with the Raptors. But if you're in win now mode,
Bradley Beal is the player to acquire, because I know a lot of people right away, as soon as they heard Gary Trent Jr.'s name in there, they're going to disagree with you. But you know what? Gary Trent Jr. is a really intriguing player. And we have to remember he's a restricted free agent. So we can afford to pay him a lot more, in the 20 millions, and acquire Bradley Beal in that sense. Now, obviously, we would have to give up more than just Gary Trent Jr. I think, obviously, you'd have to give up a pick. Now, how many future first-round picks? Personally, I would give up maybe 2. 3 is really asking for a lot, especially because Gary Trent Jr., we've seen what he does in the limited time with the Raptors. He has a really bright future in the NBA. So I want to hear your thoughts on what you would give up for Bradley Beal, or how many first-round picks would you be willing to give up for Bradley Beal?
I honestly think 2 is a good number for me. I think you really nailed that one on the head. 3 is maybe like the absolute worst that I would maybe consider, depending on the protections on the pick and depending on whether or not Washington's maybe willing to include somebody else in that deal to sweeten it for the Raptors. Say, just off the top of my head, funny enough, again, a player that was also recently acquired by that team, Daniel Gafford. Lord knows this team could use a big. I think he'd be a nice solution to, have come in that Bradley Beal trade. So if it's a situation like that, I'd be maybe a little more open to giving up that 3rd pick, but I really feel like 2 is the number there where that's probably where I'd want to and
we know Masai Ujiri. He's not one to get, he usually fools other general managers and organizations. Most people aren't going to be doing that with Masai. That's what we saw, Miami Heat and kind of Raptors going back and forth with that Kyle Lowry trade. I'm sure Miami Heat, Pat Riley, he does the same with other teams as well, where he kind of tries to rip them off, get a lot of pieces. He obviously did that with Houston, but He's not going to do that with the Raptors and either of the Washington Wizards. I think Masai Ujiri is very smart, and especially trades. I don't think he's going to give up too many picks. And also, now obviously we'd probably have to add a few more pieces in there besides Gary Trent Jr. I know a lot of people may disagree on this. Maybe throwing Chris Boucher. He has one more year left on his contract, and he's going to demand a lot of money after his contract is up as well. So maybe him, some other probably filler salaries as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I completely agree with what you're saying, and it's actually funny. You were talking about the whole like Pat Riley Masai conversation. I would have given any amount of money to have been on the conference call or like on the phone call, listening to how those conversations like Pat and Masai were going, because knowing just who those two figures are in terms of like the NBA world, I can just imagine it was just two I'm going to say this in the most Toronto way I could possibly say it. Two finessers just going at it and just trying to fleece one another for the package that they want, and then just refusing to budge because they were both like, no. and
that's exactly why sometimes you wonder why Kyle Lowry didn't get traded. That's exactly why, because as you mentioned, they both want to finance teams, and they're both on, they're usually doing that to other teams. And when you get two guys going at it like that, it's a trade's not going to happen. They're both very stubborn and what they want, and they'll be they won't budge. So,
but in this situation, I think I completely agree with you in the sense that Masai definitely has the upper hand in any dealings with the Washington Wizards. The only kind of card, I guess, the only thing working against his favor is Bradley Beal's just incomprehensible commitment to that franchise.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, like if I okay, like to each their own, but if I was a star player in the NBA and I was losing as much as I was with the Washington Wizards, why be that loyal to that franchise? In the words of Anne Hathaway's Catwoman from The Dark Knight Rises, you owe them nothing.
No, I agree. It's not like, it's not like the Wizards have some intriguing young guys coming up. Obviously, we know they drafted Danny or whatever I forget his last name at the 9th pick.
Avdija, I think it's.
Yeah, there you go. You got the pronunciation right. But yeah, it's not like he's going to be a star player one day. You know what? He's going to be a nice player, but they don't really have a lot of young, great pieces coming up. So he's kind of stuck in nowhere's land. So yeah, I definitely agree with you there. He should ask for a trade, and he's got his contract coming up, and you know what? He's still fairly young, but you've seen what injuries happen, and you don't want to be one of those guys that goes down with injuries and like a DeMarcus Cousins or something like that, right? So
yeah,
I think he should definitely seize the opportunity and try to contend or go on someone like, Raptors, and where he can be the focal point off that offense. So
what I do find interesting, and I hate that every time I bring it up, I can't remember the exact report and timing that it happens, but I remember it was in 2019. I think the first time around when there were Bradley Beal trade rumors, when he was talking about the list of possible destinations he could go and saying it's just like, yeah, but it wouldn't be my team. He actually did mention Toronto. I see that as a plus, because there's obviously this thing that I do think is a little bit untrue, but this thing talked about where players don't want to come play for Toronto. And I honestly thought it was so cool to just see, this star player mention us amongst, some of the best teams that he could go join. And I was like, hey, we're in that group.
we're finally a destination where a star player wants to go. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why we've been linked to him in the past. And even a report that came out like 2-3 weeks ago said we're the dark horse team that should, people should look out for acquiring Bradley Beal in the offseason. So that would be a match made in heaven. Obviously, we would have to part with some pieces. And I do want to get back on that real quick here before we move on to another topic. I think, unfortunately, you would have to, as I mentioned, 2 first-round picks, Gary Trent Jr., Chris Boucher. Now, I personally wouldn't do this, but you may have to throw in someone like Malachi Flynn or someone else in there to get that trade done. Now, that is obviously asking for a lot, but as we've seen in the NBA, you do need to give up a lot. We saw what the Nets had to give up for James Harden, so I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
it's a tough one. I feel like no matter what you say in this situation, it feels like you're betraying somebody, either the Raptors players or I guess the value of Bradley Beal to an extent. Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. Like at the end of the day, I talk about this all the time on my channel where the NBA is a business, and at the end of it, you might have to part with guys that maybe you're emotionally connected to, maybe are like young and exciting players that you see have a potential future in this league and you see the upside, but it really depends on what direction you want to go with the team. And I think that would be the big thing with this whole conversation is, do the Raptors want to take the long approach, or do they want to, quickly jump back to being a possible contender in the East? And I promise we'll get to that later. But I think throwing in somebody like Malachi into this mix really depends on what the team approach would be in terms of, are we bringing back Kyle Lowry in the offseason as well? Are we going all in now? Do we feel like we have a good enough team that can compete right this second if we make that trade? I really think, again, like with the addition of Bradley Beal, I really think that's where you're having that conversation where, okay, I don't want to give up Malachi, but Bradley Beal raises the ceiling of this team so much that it's a means to an end.
Yeah, no, I agree. You made some really good points there. I totally agree. And Masai Ujiri said this at the trade deadline as well. He said we can go in multiple directions in the offseason. I mean, they could trade Malachi Flynn. We don't know what's going to happen. But if I'm throwing Malachi Flynn in there and with those other guys mentioned and 2 first-round draft picks, I want Bradley Beal to commit to us long-term, because I believe his contract comes off after next season. So we'll have him, it'll be like not saying he won't re-sign with us, and not saying it's a Kawhi Leonard type of situation, but I don't want it to be another 1-year rental kind of situation, especially giving up so many pieces like that. So if I'm giving up Gary Trent, Malachi, Chris Boucher, and 2 first-round draft picks, I want Gary Trent to commit to the Raptors and re-sign as soon as we trade him. So, or else I personally wouldn't do that trade. So
yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Another name that I think has been around in trade rumors, and I think is worth exploring just because of the team need. It's been somebody I've talked about on this channel, and I actually got a mixed, I'd say, reception to it, but Karl Anthony Towns. Now, I want to say this in Towns' favor. I feel like he has a bad rep right now. And I don't feel like it's all completely earned, where people talk about, he's not a player that contributes to winning. And in his very justifiable defense, in my opinion, he plays for the Minnesota Timberwolves. That is historically one of the most incompetent franchises in the NBA. And guys, I mean, don't get me wrong, should a star player of like Cat's caliber maybe is it concerning that he's not raising their ceiling a little bit more? To an extent, yes, but at the same time, he is dealt one of the worst hands in the NBA. And on top of which, all the personal stuff this season too, just I feel so bad for the guy in terms of like how many people he's lost to COVID. I guess that's a little besides the point, but still. I know another concern is like the injury issues that have come up of late, but like he hasn't always been injury prone in his career. I feel like this is a recent thing, and I don't know. It's not something I'm personally losing sleep over. When I'm looking at Karl Anthony Towns and I'm imagining him on the Raptors, I see a legitimate first option that could really boost this team, especially in a very obvious area of need. Lord knows we're one of the worst rebounding teams in the league, and we need any kind of offense really from that 5-spot position. So Cat can do a lot for you in that regard. For my money's worth, he's the most naturally gifted in terms of his skill set at that center position, with all due respect to Jokic and to Joel Embiid. Does he have some defensive issues? Yes. Can they be cleaned up when he's playing on a good defensive team with guys like, I don't know, potentially Chris Boucher, OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, like flanking him in this scenario? Yeah, I absolutely do think they can be cleaned up.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know what? When you have a chance to acquire someone like Karl Anthony Towns, I forget how old he is. It's like, 24 years old or
25, I believe.
25. I mean, he's still young. He still has 2, 3, 4 years to enter his prime. And you know what? I actually took him in my fantasy league, and I didn't realize how many points and rebounds and every little thing he does. He's someone out there who can easily average, especially on the Raptors, as you mentioned. We need a big who can rebound. So he's going to be our main guy rebounding out there. He can easily average 11, 12 rebounds, put up 20 plus points, 22, 25 points on any given night. And he can shoot that 3-point ball as well. That's what a lot of people don't realize about Karl Anthony Towns. I didn't realize what a great 3-point shooter he was until I was looking at some of his stats, and I was kind of taken away. I didn't realize he shot the 3 ball that well. I was looking at his stats last season. He made something like 2 or 3 3-pointers a game, which is crazy for a big man. And like you said, you know what? Nick Nurse's defense, he can fix anyone up. And Minnesota is not really known for developing players, and he's still playing as well as he is on that team, in that organization. Bring him to the Raptors. Get Nick Nurse on his ass playing defense, getting rebounds, getting those blocks, whatever he has to do. I think he can definitely help him become a better player. We know our system is amazing. And you got guys like Fred VanVleet, who's always just nitpicking or, trying to swap the ball away from those big men. So it'll be great for Cat to have guys with that ability around him. So definitely, I'm all for the Karl Anthony Towns trade.
And the last thing I do want to throw on for the defensive conversation is we've at least seen flashes when Karl Anthony Towns was surrounded by competent defenders. And by competent defenders, I mean Jimmy Butler. He played, I don't want to say he played great defense by any means, but he played decent defense. I don't think he was a negative on the defensive end when he was playing beside Jimmy. And Jimmy just happens to be one of the, I'd say, I don't want to say best anymore, but still one of the better defenders in the league. And I think something that just will go a long way is playing behind, or not behind, excuse me, beside a guy like OG that for my money's worth is a top 5 defender in the league. And a guy like Chris Boucher that could maybe help clean up some of Cat's issues in terms of rim protection. Whatever Cat lacks, cool, Chris Boucher can come and make up for it. Now, you'll notice I'm very selectively leaving out the name of Pascal Siakam. And it is honestly because I think if you're going to go and try and chase Cat, I talked about it in the video when I did the collab of Clutch Takes, I think Siakam does have to be in that deal.
Now, I'm a big Pascal guy, so that really hurts the Raptors, but I know a lot of people may jump on that trade right away. I don't know. I'm a little bit on the edge on that trade because like the whole reason for the Raptors to get Cat is because you have someone that not only helps Pascal offensively, but also because he can stretch that he can stretch the floor. So he's a big that can shoot that 3-point ball. So it gives Pascal the opportunity to drive in the lane. But as you mentioned, now this trade is actually more trickier than the Bradley Beal trade because you know what, Cat is young. He's still under contract for multiple years, and it becomes really challenging. Like, who do you give up? I'm not giving up OG Anunoby. Hell no. I'm not touching OG Anunoby in that Cat trade. Now, Fred VanVleet, I don't know if they trade him. They already have D'Angelo Russell, so it becomes tricky. You know what? It becomes really challenging to trade for Karl Anthony Towns, and we do need to match the salary.
I will say though that D'Lo has been a bench guy a lot for the Timberwolves, so I don't necessarily think they would turn away from Fred VanVleet if offered. But you're right, it is a tricky situation because in a perfect world, Cat is somebody that if you just took the current roster and the team of the Raptors and you just added Cat to play that 5 spot, I think this team is like a top 3 team in the East easy. But the problem is you have to give up one of the pieces from the core that do genuinely make the team special.
Yeah, that's where I'm kind of glad we're just fans and not general managers making that decision, because that's a really tough decision, right? So that's just me having that emotional attachment to Pascal and just, you know, what he's become as a player the last couple of years with the Raptors and being that big part of their offense. So obviously I would love Karl Anthony Towns on the Raptors. Now it's a tough decision to make, and I don't know. Personally, if you ask me, I'm not including Pascal. I try to trade some other guys, maybe picks. Hell, I'll even throw Gary Trent Jr. again in that trade, you know, if you had. I know a lot of people disagree with this one, but I mean, you keep Pascal and you keep Karl Anthony Towns together, man. That's a great combination, you know. So
I'm just gonna say this now. If for whatever reason Gary Trent Jr. just happens to stumble upon this video on YouTube, We love you, bro. We're happy you're in Toronto. We're happy you're a part of the Raptors. We are just talking hypotheticals here. We love you, bro.
Absolutely. Now, I hope fans don't take this the wrong way, because I'm absolutely in love with Gary Trent Jr. and what his game is. You know, his confidence, his swagger, what he brings. You saw him off, you know, in those sidelines dressed like that. And, you know, he's got that bond already with OG and Anunoby. So yeah, that's cool to see, you know, two young guys, 22, 23 years old, you know, both of them. So they're definitely a big part of the Raptors' future. But it becomes really tough, because we have to re-sign Gary Trent Jr. And again, that's just me having that emotional attachment. That's why as fans, we don't make these decisions. General managers do. They have to not include their feelings into trades, and they have to do what's best for the team. But I'm personally not trading Pascal for that reason. But yeah, it's a really tough trade on who you would include for, you know what, a center like Karl Anthony Towns. So
if not Towns, if not Beal, I have one more name for you that I think might be interesting, that I think is maybe going under the radar a little bit. Zach Levine.
I knew that was coming. Zach Levine. I love Zach Levine. Now he's someone I would have loved for the Raptors to acquire. We've heard his name by fans a little bit in the rumors about Raptors maybe wanting to trade for him. Now I'm not gonna throw Gary Trent Jr. under the bus here again. It just seems like repetitive talk and just always including Gary Trent Jr. But it becomes a tough trade, and again, because it makes that trade that much harder now, because the Bulls have acquired Nikola Vucevic, and they gave up a young piece in Wendell Carter Jr. And also, I believe they gave up 2 future first-round draft picks. So it's hard to do that trade, especially for that reason. But it's I don't know, like who do you include in a trade? You're definitely not including OG. Let's be honest, OG you're not including for Zach Levine.
I think, well, here's the thing, just to touch upon one of the things that you said in terms of the Bulls did just go after Vucevic aggressively. Yes, it's not working out right now.
Clearly not.
Like the Bulls, for my money's worth, should have easily climbed to like a 7 and 8 seed after that Vooch trade, but they haven't been good. I think there's some issues in terms of the personnel and what Billy Donovan is trying to do with that team that's just not working out right now. And I follow both. I'm sure you might know them from YouTube. I follow both Kenny Beecham and Rusty Buckets.
I've heard of Rusty Buckets. I'm not sure about the other name, but
King of the Fourth Quarter.
Oh yes, I've heard of him.
Yeah. They're obviously both Bulls fans, and just listening to their analysis of how they talk about the Bulls, it just doesn't seem like they have a very good roster right now. Like they'll sing the praises of guys like Zach Levine. They'll sing the praises of guys like, well, Vooch, since like showing up there. Even somebody like Thad Young, even somebody like, who am I missing here? Daniel Tice, Patrick Williams. Those are guys they'll talk about in a positive manner. But past that, they really just don't think there's a lot of good role players on that team. In particular, I know Rusty especially hates Lauri Markkanen, which I think is hilarious. Anytime he goes on a Lauri rant, I am just laughing my ass off. He's great content. I know Kobe White is somebody that they both kind of consider overrated. And just basically my point here with this conversation is, what if in a year's time, let's say this year, the Bulls don't even get into the play-in and they ended up missing it. Let's say in a best case scenario here, the Wizards get into that 10 seed, because I've mentioned before, I don't want the Raptors there. I'm standing by that. The Wizards get into that 10th seed, and the Bulls and the Raptors both end up outside. Another season goes by and the Bulls still aren't good. At that point, you're at the point where you're running the risk that Zach Levine is going to walk in free agency for free. And do you just admit the fact that, you know what, we made a mistake in being aggressive and getting Vooch, and just tear it down, get rid of Levine, probably get rid of Vooch in this scenario too, and just ship off guys and just like start from scratch? In that scenario is where I think the Raptors would have the most leverage. But even still, if the Bulls feel like they're not trending in the right direction, I think that is an option you can explore this offseason. And what I really like about Zach Levine is I feel like every time I feel like Zach Levine is capped out on his potential of how good he is as a player, he shows you more. And I love that. I absolutely love that. And I think he's a natural fit for the Raptors in terms of going into that shooting guard spot and just being a closer, being a bucket getter. That is something that we desperately need, especially come playoff time when, you know, it is a lot more half court oriented. There's a lot more ISO scoring going on. I think you need a guy like Zach Levine. Who do you give up for him though? Again, this is the tough conversation because it'd have to be one of the young pieces. And like you said, with the repetitiveness, Gary Trent Jr. is a name that comes up. I think Malachi is a name that would have to be tossed around that conversation. I think Chris Boucher is potentially a name that's tossed around that conversation. I don't think Zach Levine maybe has as high value as a Bradley Beal or a Karl Anthony Towns, which works in the Raptors' favor. But at the same time, he's still not going to come cheap by any means.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And you made some really good points there because their roster, when you look at it, it's kind of in a weird situation of they have some veteran players and then they got guys like Kobe White and Lauri Markkanen, who's a restricted free agent. So it's like, you're not sure what they're doing because they have two nice pieces, obviously, in Vooch and Levine, but then the rest of the roster, it's like very young or you have some random guys in there. So I do think, you know what, you did make a good point. And I can definitely see the Bulls doing that because as you mentioned, they wouldn't want Levine to walk for nothing. So he's got 1 year left on his contract, I believe. So if they decide, like he's not gonna keep staying there if they keep losing. So they might just try to sell. Now, as you mentioned, obviously Pascal is a name that comes to mind. Not that I know I just mentioned my emotional attachment to Pascal, but personally, I don't see the Bulls taking Pascal because if they're trading Zach Levine, they're trying to get young guys who they can build their future around. They're not going to get someone who's 26, 27 years old and try to contend again. So I don't think the Bulls will take that. I think they'd obviously want some picks, some young guys, as you mentioned, Malachi, Gary Trent Jr., Chris Boucher. It's just another nice piece you throw in there. Now, obviously, Chris Boucher is a little bit on the older side, but you know what? What team wouldn't want Chris Boucher? I mean, any team would love, you know, his energy, his blocks, his three-point shooting. So he's definitely a guy intriguing trade chip you can throw in there as well. So again, it gets really tough to do that trade, but if you're trading for a shooting guard, you have to move Gary Trent Jr. I know a lot of fans may say, well, let's trade Pascal and then you can move OG to the power forward, move Gary Trent or whoever, you know, to the small forward. But then I don't know how that works, to be honest. Realistically, I don't see Gary Trent as a small forward. Now, Zach Levine could play that small forward position, but I don't see that with the Bradley Beal trade. So,
I don't hate the idea of OG at the 4, just because I think he's tremendously versatile, especially defensively. So I have no issues with that. The interesting of who plays what in regards to the 2 and the 3 in some of these trade scenarios is something a little more worth exploring, especially because you're not really solving your center issues, at least if you're, you know, getting a guy like Zach Levine or Bradley Beal. Oh, so there's a lot here. With all this being said, right, does the idea of trading for a star outweigh the possibility of some of the young guys that you can be getting in the draft? That's my other thing here, where here's my issue. Maybe I'm skipping ahead a little bit here, but at the end of the day with this, if you're the Raptors and you're looking to add a star, I think these are probably in all likelihood the names that are going to be available to you. Maybe there's another surprise name that gets thrown in there come off season time, but these seem like the most likely scenarios, right? Do any one of these scenarios, I mean, do they put you over some of the best teams in the East, like a Brooklyn, like a Philadelphia, like a Milwaukee? What do you think?
I think if you're... Now, realistically speaking, nothing against Karl Anthony Towns. I spoke a lot of good about him, but I don't see him putting us over the top. He definitely puts us in the contention topic. We become the top 3 team easily with Karl Anthony Towns. I think someone like Bradley Beal or Zach Levine definitely could take you to, you know, the Eastern Conference Finals, maybe a finals if, you know, it's the right matchup. But then becomes the issue. Like, we get Bradley Beal, we get Zach Levine, one of those guys, then we still have that center issue. So do you sign and trade Kyle Lowry in the offseason for a big man? Like, we still have to address that big man issue. So those pieces, don't get me wrong, they're really nice pieces and they definitely help us move a little bit further in the playoffs. But we do until we have to address that center issue as well. So if we do get those guys, we have to somehow find a way to get someone at that center position as well to really help us reach, deep into the playoffs. So
I completely agree. And my thing with this topic is, as much as I want to be optimistic about, adding one of these guys and adding it to a core that's won a championship already and like seeing the results, I will say, I don't think any of these guys put the Raptors over the Brooklyn Nets. I'm just gonna be very blunt about that. I really don't think it does. I think it maybe puts them on par with Philadelphia and Milwaukee. I don't think it puts them over Brooklyn. I really don't.
Yeah, Brooklyn's a tough team. No, it's again, you can't really. Now, obviously, they're more talented. There's no doubt about that. They got 3 players that can hit clutch shots. So a playoff series with the Brooklyn Nets becomes really difficult. As I mentioned, we don't know how the Raptors, it's all about team chemistry. We don't know how they're going to play with Bradley Beal. For all we know, they may not even be top 3. Now, obviously, the talent is there. Sometimes it's just how well the players mesh together. Now, we've seen this season how much talent the Raptors have in their, 10th place in the East. So I think it all depends on how the talent meshes together, plays. Team chemistry is a huge part of that. Realistically, I'd have to agree with you here. I think we go deep in the playoffs until we run into the Brooklyn Nets or avoid them at all costs. I don't realistically see us beating Brooklyn Nets in a 7-game series. Maybe we push it to 6. If we're lucky, we push it to 7. But they just have too much talent. Maybe down the road, if those guys get older, maybe 2-3 years down the road, if injury happens, we know Kyrie Irving has had a history of injuries. If something like that were to happen in a playoff series, then maybe. But still, it's a really tough series for us to win against the Brooklyn Nets.
The one point here that I will contradict myself with is I do think the Raptors, in terms of personnel, depending on who they hold on to here, do have one of the better equipped units to go against Brooklyn, in the sense that if you're holding on, let's say in this scenario, to Fred, to OG, and to Pascal, you can throw Pascal against Kevin Durant, you can throw OG against James Harden, you can throw Fred against Kyrie Irving. I feel relatively okay about that because those are all very good defenders. It's just when push comes to shove in clutch time, I don't know, man. It's like you were saying, they have guys that can get big time buckets. You got a Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant all on the perimeter, and you have to shut that down. And they're quietly have good role players emerging around them. I think Nicholas Claxton is somebody that's incredibly underrated. He's not a star by any means, but he fits that team so well in terms of what they need of just defense, energy, rebounding. Joe Harris is a perfect complement to that team as well. You have to worry about him getting open on the perimeter and just sniping threes because of all the attention that's going to be given to these star players. And then the list could go on. They're quietly, they have this perception of they're not that deep, but at the same time, they quietly do have a lot of good pieces on that team. So really, I don't see it happening in a 7-game series. And that's going to lead me, I guess, to my final conclusion here is, if it's a question of holding on to a lottery pick or going after a star, despite the fact that, Pascal's already 27 and on the older side, that Fred's already 27, I would actually rather see the Raptors take the longer approach here. And, if that day comes where you have to move those guys for younger assets, you do it. I have no issues with the Raptors taking a longer rebuild because I think a team like Brooklyn will be around for at least 2 to 3 seasons. I think that's kind of the timeline that, not including this one, mind you, that they will be a threat in the Eastern Conference, and not a threat, the threat. And in that sense, I really don't hate the idea of the Raptors just taking a step back, building up an incredibly talented team, and a talented young team in that time, that at the point where these guys are ready to just kind of step down and not be, the gatekeeper for the Eastern Conference, the Raptors are ready to surge onto the scene.
Yeah, no, you made some good points there, and I totally agree with you. You know what? My initial thought was, no, try to acquire a star player. But when you think about it realistically, how many star players have the Raptors besides Kawhi Leonard acquired? It takes someone like, Kawhi Leonard potentially sitting out a season with whatever it was, fake injury, whatever it was. And his price definitely dropped for the Raptors to get that. And even then we had to give up our franchise player. So it's obviously much easier as fans to say, let's trade this guy, only 2 first-round picks, but it's so much harder to actually make those deals happen. And on top of that, you trade for those guys and you do have them for 1 year, you would need to re-sign them. So I think I do agree with your point there. Kevin Durant isn't going anywhere. Kyrie Irving, although he has injuries, he's not going anywhere. James Harden, they're all really good players and they're going to be around for at least 2-3 years. So I do agree with you in that sense. And I do want to mention that although we talk about Pascal and Fred VanVleet's age, they may be 27, but people have to remember how well Kyle Lowry aged when he was 27 too. He's 34, turning 35 next year, I believe. So like he's still kicking it, you know, and I still believe it's that mental aspect. They may not have huge jump like statistical stats wise anyways, Pascal, but you improve that mental game. And I'm not saying Pascal is gonna, you know, go out there and turn it around quickly, but I think people estimate the amount of experience that really helps players go. Yes, they might be 27, 28, but players, as we've seen in today's NBA, are still playing at a really high level at 30, 31. It's not like 10, 12 years ago where players really slowed down. You're seeing a lot of players still maintain a high level of play at that age, 30, 31 years old. So I would have to agree with you. Develop some guy, take him. It's hard to get a top 10 pick, especially in a draft like this where they're really stacked and you have a lot of nice complement players outside of the top 5, top 6. Take that player, develop them, and you know what, we'll see what happens with the future. You have to sometimes just go with the best option right now, which is to draft a player, develop them in your system, and then you can move them in the future, move other pieces to kind of surround those pieces. And like I've mentioned earlier, we have OG Anunoby, we have Gary Trent Jr. Those guys are 22, 23 years old. So even if Pascal, Fred VanVleet don't work out, move those pieces in the future. Those guys are still 5-6 years away from their prime. So,
And to your point, actually, I like that you brought up that a lot of guys are playing better later into their career. I think the advancements in sports medicine and in taking care of your body is just going a long way to seeing these guys like LeBron James, Chris Paul, Kyle Lowry just play elite level basketball later into their career. I do think Kyle Lowry has shown signs of slowing down, but like they're not drastic by any means. I just think the main thing that stands out for me with Kyle Lowry is just, and obviously this is a thing that comes with age. You see it with a player like LeBron as well. Not that I'm comparing the two by any means, but Kyle Lowry attacks the ball less and he's less aggressive. He's not as good going inside anymore. He's kind of more, his game is more built around being a marksman, I'd say, from the perimeter now, which is fine. It's a shift that he's had in his game to keep his game sustainable, but just, you can tell even on defensive end, I think he's lost a little bit of quickness, like lateral quickness, sorry. And he's lost a step there, but at the same time, he's still really good. And yes, going back to the original point here, I think guys are generally speaking going to be playing and extending their primes, I guess, longer with their careers with the advancements in sports medicine that I don't necessarily hate the idea of. And let me try to manifest something here. The Raptors get into the top 5, get one of like the big players in this year's draft. And then it's like, cool. By the time those players are like really starting to like, you know, hit their stride, sure, Fred VanVleet and Pascal are going to be in their 30s, but hell, they'll still be.
How old was how old was Kyle Lowry when we won that championship? So there you go.
Exactly. And you can make an argument depending on who you ask. He was either the second or the third best player on that championship team. For my money's worth, despite the fact that, you know, Siakam was the second best scorer, I still think Kyle Lowry was the second best player on that championship team.
Yeah, totally. I agree. He had some amazing performances, and you saw that game 6 as well. He comes out firing. So I think he was. Obviously, Pascal scored and, you know, did other things, but Kyle Lowry was the main facilitator. He did a lot of little things you don't see on the stat sheet. So I definitely was, in my opinion, he was the second best player on that championship run.
Mm-hmm. So I think we agree here. I think the allure of a star is really exciting, but so is the idea of drafting high. And hopefully, while I continue to try and manifest things, hopefully we're in a good position in the lottery because we don't end up in the play-in. Hopefully we jump up a little bit in that lottery, and we're hopefully drafting in the top 4, getting one of those guys, and then going from there.
Absolutely. I would love an Evan Mobley, or, you know, we've been hearing Fade for Cade the entire season. So could you imagine if the Raptors somehow managed to get those guys? That would be a dream scenario.
Oh my goodness. If I could manifest anything, and I mean anything, God damn it, I would want to see Cade in a Raptors jersey.
Cade over Evan Mobley?
Yeah, I love Evan Mobley. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a tremendous prospect, but I think there's only one Cade Cunningham in this draft.
Yeah. So if we were to get Cade, I'm going to throw this last thing at you here before we end the video. So if we get Cade, what do you do with Fred VanVleet, potentially Gary Trent Jr.? Do you move one of those guys, or do you have Cade coming off the bench?
No, the thing that I like about Cade, with his size in particular, being a 6'8" player, you can have him, technically speaking, listed at like the 2, but because of his size, for the most part, at least defensively, I think you can be matching him up a lot, like with players that play the 3. So I think you have no issue running a starting lineup that includes Fred VanVleet, Cade Cunningham, Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, excuse me, and Pascal Siakam. And what I like about Cade, like I said, let's say in this scenario, Trent is technically listed as your 3. You can still have him guarding the 2. That's perfectly fine. And you can have Cade taking the bigger matchups if there's somebody at that small forward position that you really feel like can expose Gary Trent Jr.'s size. At the same time, yes, Cade Cunningham isn't a center, but you know what Cade Cunningham can do at an elite level in the NBA? Rebound the ball from whatever position he's playing. But I think it's great. One of the things that I talked about in my Cade Cunningham video is his assist numbers don't really pop off the charts now, but I do think he's an incredibly talented passer. And I think once he's surrounded by NBA level players that are just better suited to knock down those open shots or to finish around the basket, I think somebody like Cade Cunningham with his passing can open up so many easy buckets for a player like Pascal Siakam. Hell, even like OG Anunoby. Fred VanVleet will get a lot of easy catch and shoot looks, so will Gary Trent. I just think Cade unlocks so much for you with this team. And then on top of which, what's the thing that we keep coming back to, and especially with these star players, a guy that can close games by just creating his own shot at the end of it. Cade Cunningham is that player. Cade Cunningham can absolutely create his own shot in the big moment. You saw, I'd say, a fair amount of flashes when he was at Oklahoma State. He knew he was the best player. He had no issue going there and getting his shot. Obviously, if he shows up on the Raptors, I don't think he's the best player on the team right away. But at the same time, I think he will have the confidence to know come crunch time, he has the green light to take that shot. And I think he's going to be, theoretically, tremendous in that role and tremendous at cleaning up just a lot of issues, with the starting lineup. And then past that, say in this scenario, you bring back Kyle Lowry in the offseason, you have Kyle Lowry and Malachi coming off the bench. You potentially have, Chris Boucher still coming off that bench. Maybe like a guy like Paul Watson, Utah Watanabe, depending on who you decide is worth keeping around from these role players that are having these good games now in this quote unquote development period of the Raptors tanking. Your bench issues seemingly get better as well. I think Cade is perfect for this team, and if I can manifest something, I'm putting that energy out in the universe right now. Cade Cunningham should absolutely be wearing a Raptors jersey come draft time.
And you know what? Sometimes you have to take the best player available rather than fill out the positional needs. So you got to take the best available player, especially if it's a first or second overall we're drafting. So you take Cade Cunningham. He's a generational player, and end of topic. There's no discussion about choosing this or this. You take Cade Cunningham, no doubt.
It was literally like I said in the last video when I got to the sections where it was like the case for and the case against. And there's no case against. It's a formality. You have a chance to take Cade, you take Cade.
Definitely. I agree.
So that does it for us today. What do you folks think? Should the Raptors hold on to their lottery pick, which is hopefully going to be in the top 4? I'm going to manifest it. We're moving up in this draft. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel as well if you're new here. It goes a long way, and I would love to have you back here for the next video. But don't just hit that subscribe for me. If you really enjoyed what the Waraich Report was saying, head over to his channel, hit subscribe for him as well. He does phenomenal content. It is such a joy to watch. And yeah, I think he's worth the subscription. Absolutely. Other than that, folks, that does it for me today. And I am out of here.